The message arrived at 3 in the morning, Earth time. Ambassador Park Tae-ho was sleeping in his small apartment in the diplomatic quarter of Seoul when his personal device began to glow with an urgent red light. He opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling for a moment before reaching for the device. He already knew what it would say. He had been expecting this summons for weeks. The holographic text floated above his palm. The Galactic High Council demanded his presence at Orbitum Prime within 48 hours. The matter concerned the future status of human territories. Tae-ho read the words twice, then set the device down and sat on the edge of his bed. Outside his window, the lights of Seoul stretched toward the horizon like a river of stars fallen to Earth 40 years. That was how long humanity had been part of the galactic community. 40 years since the first alien ship appeared in Earth's sky and changed everything. 40 years of learning, adapting, struggling to find a place among species that had traveled between stars for thousands of years. Before humans learned to make fire, Tae-ho remembered those early days. He had been a young man then, fresh from university, watching the news broadcasts with wonder and fear. The Valorians had come first, tall and graceful beings with silver skin and eyes like polished gems. They had offered humanity a place in their great galactic civilization. They had offered guidance and protection. They had offered friendship, but friendship, Tae-ho had learned, was not what the Valorians truly wanted. They wanted obedience. They wanted humanity to know its place, to stay small and quiet in a corner of the galaxy, while the older species made all the important decisions. For 40 years, Earth's leaders had accepted this arrangement. They had bent their knees and lowered their eyes and said thank you for whatever scraps fell from the council's table. Tae-ho was tired of saying thank you. He stood and walked to his window. The city below was waking up. Delivery drones moved through the morning air. People walked to work along the elevated pathways. Children ran toward school buses. None of them knew that their future was about to be decided by creatures who lived among distant stars and thought of humans as little more than clever animals. His door chimed. Tae-ho pressed the entry button without asking who it was. He already knew. Lieutenant Kim Yuna stepped inside, her military uniform crisp and perfect despite the early hour. She was young, perhaps 30 years old, with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. She had been assigned as his aide 2 years ago, and in that time, Tae-ho had come to trust her more than anyone else in the diplomatic corps. "You received the summons," she said. "It was not a question, I did. Our intelligence network has been monitoring council communications." Yuna pulled out her own device and projected a series of documents into the air between them. The Valorians have been building support for a formal restriction order. They want to limit human expansion to 3 systems. They want to reduce our military fleet to what they call a non-threatening level. And they want to place our Outer Rim colonies under Valorian oversight. Tae-ho studied the documents. The language was diplomatic, full of words like stability and mutual, benefit and galactic harmony. But he understood. What lay beneath those pretty words? Control, submission, the end of any hope that humanity might one day stand as equals among the stars. "What about the other council members?" he asked. "The Bryn will follow the Valorians. They always do. The Molturi care only about trade routes, and the Valorians have promised them access to the Kellner shipping lanes." "The Gorath." Yuna paused. "The Gorath are difficult to read. They calculate everything. If they believe siding with the Valorians serves their interests, they will vote yes, so the motion will pass." "Almost certainly." Tae-ho turned back to the window. The sun was rising now, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. He thought about his grandfather, who had fought in wars that seemed so small now compared to the vastness of space. He thought about his mother, who had raised him alone after his father died in a mining accident on Luna. He thought about all the humans who had worked and struggled and dreamed of a better future. "Contact. Fleet Admiral Choi Sunwoo," he said quietly. "Tell him to place the defense fleet on standby. Full combat readiness, but no movement yet. I want every ship we have ready to fly the moment I give the word." Yuna stared at him. "Sir, that could be seen as an act of aggression. If the Council learns we are mobilizing our military, The Council already thinks we are nothing. Animals playing with tools we do not understand. Taiho turned to face her, and his eyes were hard. Perhaps it is time they learned how wrong they are. What are you planning? I am going to attend this meeting. I am going to listen to their ultimatum. And then I am going to do something no human has ever done before. He paused. I am going to say no. Yuna was silent for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. I will contact the Admiral, and I will prepare the secure communication equipment. You will need a direct line to President Han. Good. And Yuna. He waited until she met his eyes. Pack for a long journey. If this goes the way I think it will, we may not be coming home for some time. 6 hours later, their shuttle lifted off from the Seoul spaceport. Taiho watched through the window as Earth grew smaller below them. The blue oceans, the green continents, the white swirls of clouds. His home. The home of 8 billion people who were counting on him. Even if they did not know it, the journey to Orbitum Prime took 18 hours. Taiho spent most of that time reviewing everything he knew about the Council and its members. He memorized names, histories, weaknesses. He studied past negotiations and identified patterns. He looked for any advantage he could find. Yuna worked beside him, running simulations and analyzing possible outcomes. The numbers were not good. In every scenario where humanity accepted the Council's terms, they survived but remained forever under Valorian control. In every scenario where they refused, war was likely. And in war, the numbers said humanity would lose. But numbers, Taiho knew, did not tell the whole story. Numbers could not measure courage. Numbers could not calculate the power of a people fighting for their freedom. When the shuttle finally docked at Orbitum Prime, Taiho stood and straightened his diplomatic robes. The station was neutral territory, a massive structure floating in the void between star systems. Representatives of every known species passed through its corridors. It was the heart of galactic civilization. It's a place where the fate of worlds was decided. Taiho walked through those corridors with his head held high. Aliens of 100 different species passed him without a second glance. To them, he was nothing. A representative of a minor species barely worth noticing. They looked through him as though he were invisible. That was fine. Let them underestimate humanity. Let them believe humans were weak and insignificant. Soon enough, they would learn the truth. Soon enough, the entire galaxy would know what humans were capable of when they had nothing left to lose. The council chamber was the largest enclosed space Taiho had ever seen. It rose upward for hundreds of meters, a vast dome of polished metal and crystal that seemed to capture the light of distant stars. Rows upon rows of seats climbed toward the ceiling, each one occupied by a representative of a different species. There were over 200 of them, creatures of every shape and size imaginable. Some had scales, others had feathers. Some breathed oxygen, others carried their own atmosphere in sealed helmets. All of them were watching as Taiho walked toward the petitioner's platform at the center of the chamber. The platform was small, barely large enough for one person to stand. It was positioned at the lowest point of the room, surrounded on all sides by the elevated seats of the council members. The message was clear. Whoever stood on that platform was beneath everyone else. They were a supplicant, a beggar asking for the favor of their betters. Taiho took his place and waited. High Speaker Keth rose from his seat at the highest point of the chamber. He was Valorian, as all High Speakers had been for the past 1,000 years. His silver skin gleamed under the artificial lights, and his voice carried easily through the enormous space without any need for amplification. Ambassador Park Taiho of Earth Keith began. You have been summoned before this, council to hear our decision regarding the future of your species within galactic civilization? Taiho said nothing. He simply stood and listened, his face revealing nothing of his thoughts. For 40 years, humanity has been permitted to exist under the protection and guidance of this council. We have shared our knowledge with you. We have opened our markets to your traders. We have allowed you to establish colonies beyond your home system. Keth paused, and his gem-like eyes seemed to gleam with something that might have been contempt. And how has humanity repaid this generosity? With reckless expansion. With military buildup, with ambitions that far exceed your proper place in the galactic order. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Taiho saw the Bryn representative clicking its mandibles in approval. The Molturi delegate's tentacles waved in what he knew was a gesture of support. Even the stone-faced Gorath seemed to be watching with something like anticipation. Therefore, Keth continued, this council has reached a decision. Effective immediately, humanity will cease all expansion beyond the boundaries of the Sol system and its 3 established colonies. All additional settlements in the Outer Rim will be transferred to Valorian. Oversight for the purpose of maintaining galactic stability. Furthermore, the human military fleet will be reduced to a level appropriate for a species of your standing. No more than 50 combat-capable vessels will be permitted. Taiho felt Yuna stiffen beside him in the observer's gallery. 50 ships. They currently had over 3,000. The council was not just limiting humanity. They were defanging them completely. This motion has been presented to the full council for a vote, Keth announced. Representatives, please indicate your decision. One by one, lights appeared on a massive display screen. Green for yes. Red for no. Taiho watched as the green lights multiplied across the board. The Bryn voted yes. The Molturi voted yes. The Gorath calculated for exactly 3 seconds, then voted yes. Species after species indicated their support until the board was a sea of green light without a single red mark. The motion passes unanimously, Keth declared. Ambassador Park, you will now formally accept these terms on behalf of humanity. This was the moment. Taiho had known it was coming, had prepared for it during the long journey to the station. But now that it was here, he felt a strange calm settle over him. Fear was gone. Doubt was gone. There was only certainty. I request 1 hour to consult with my government, he said, his voice steady and clear. Keth's expression flickered with something that might have been surprise. 1 hour. The terms are non-negotiable. There is nothing to discuss. Nevertheless, I must speak with my president before making any formal declarations. Surely the council can understand the importance of proper procedure. For a long moment, Keth stared down at him. Then, slowly, the High Speaker nodded. You have 30 minutes. Use them wisely. Taiho bowed slightly and left the chamber. Yuna fell into step beside him as he walked quickly toward the secure communication room they had been assigned. Neither of them spoke until the door closed behind them and the security systems activated. They really did it, Yuna said, her voice tight with anger. They actually voted to put us back in a cage. They did what they have always planned to do. We were never meant to be equals in their eyes. We were pets at best, pests at worst. Taiho activated the communication console. Now we find out what kind of people we truly are. The connection to Earth took several seconds to establish. When President Han Minji's face appeared on the screen, Taiho saw that she already knew. Her expression was calm, but her eyes burned with the same fire he felt in his own chest. Ambassador Park, I have been briefed on the Council's decision, Madam President. They have given us 30 minutes to formally accept their terms. If we refuse, they will almost certainly attempt to enforce the order by force. I am aware. President Han leaned forward slightly. What is your assessment of our military position? Admiral Choi has our fleet ready. 3,000 ships on standby. But the Council's combined forces outnumber us significantly. If we fight, we will be facing enemies on multiple fronts. And if we submit... Taiho thought about that question. He thought about what submission would mean. Humanity reduced to a handful of systems, their military destroyed, their colonies controlled by Valorian governors. They would survive, perhaps. But survival was not the same as living. If we submit, he said slowly, we lose everything we have built. Everything we have dreamed. We become exactly what they have always believed us to be. Nothing. President Han was silent for a moment. Then she nodded, and when she spoke, her voice was the voice of 8 billion people who refused to bow. Then we do not submit. You have the authority to speak for Earth, Ambassador. Do what must be done. Connection ended. Taiho stood in the silent room, feeling the weight of those words. Do what must be done. Such simple words for such an enormous thing. Sir Yuna's voice was quiet. Are we really going to do this? We are. They will call us aggressors. They will say we started a war. History is written by the survivors. Taiho turned to face her, and she saw that his face had changed. The diplomat was gone. In his place stood something harder, older, more dangerous. Contact Admiral Choi. Tell him to begin moving the fleet to the coordinates we discussed. And tell him to wait for my signal. What signal? Taiho smiled, but there was no warmth in it. He will know it when he hears it. The entire galaxy will know it. He straightened his robes and walked toward the door. In a few minutes, he would return to the council chamber. He would stand on that small platform, surrounded by species who thought they controlled the fate of humanity, and he would speak words that would change everything. The galaxy was about to learn what humans were made of. Taiho walked back into the council chamber with exactly 2 minutes remaining on his allotted time. The assembled representatives watched him approach the petitioner's platform with expressions ranging from boredom to contempt. To them, this was a formality. The human would accept the terms because humans always accepted what they were given. That was simply how things worked in the galaxy. High Speaker Keth rose from his elevated seat. Ambassador Park, have you consulted with your government? I have. And you are prepared to formally accept the council's terms? Taiho did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the vast chamber, meeting the eyes of as many delegates as he could. The insectoid Bryn with their clicking mandibles, the flowing tentacles of the Molteri, the stone-hard faces of the Gorath, species that had existed for millennia before humanity learned to walk upright. Species that had built empires and conquered worlds while humans were still living in caves. They were powerful. They were ancient, and they were about to learn that none of that mattered. Before I give my response, Taiho said, I would like to exercise my right as a diplomatic representative to address the full council. Keth's silver features showed surprise. That is ... unusual. But it is within your rights. You may speak. Taiho pressed a small device hidden in his sleeve. It was a transmitter, connected to every communication system on Orbitum Prime. In moments, his words would be broadcast not just to this chamber, but to every ship, every station, every world connected to the galactic network. Billions upon billions of beings would hear what he was about to say. Members of the Galactic Council, he began, his voice steady and clear. I stand before you today as the representative of humanity. A species you have tolerated for 40 years. A species you have guided and protected, as you often remind us. A species you have allowed to exist at the edge of your great civilization. Grateful for whatever kindness you chose to show us. He paused, and the chamber was utterly silent. For 40 years, we have accepted this arrangement. We have bent our knees. We have lowered our eyes. We have said thank you for scraps and smiled while you patted us on the head like obedient animals. His voice grew harder. We have watched as you divided the galaxy among yourselves. As you decided which species would rise and which would fall, as you played games with the lives of billions, and always we have stayed quiet. Always we have known our place. Keth shifted in his seat. Something in the human's tone was wrong. This was not the speech of a species preparing to submit. Today, you have presented us with an ultimatum. Abandon our colonies. Destroy our fleet. Accept Valorian oversight of our worlds. In exchange, you offer us continued existence, survival, the chance to remain as we have always been, small, quiet, obedient. Taiho straightened his shoulders and raised his head high. On behalf of the 8 billion people of Earth and the millions more living in our colonies across the stars, I give you our answer. He took a deep breath. No. The word echoed through the chamber like a thunderclap. Delegates shifted in their seats, exchanging confused glances. The Bryn representative's mandibles clicked rapidly. Keth's gem-like eyes narrowed to slits. You refuse? The High Speaker said, his voice dangerous. We refuse. Taiho's voice grew stronger, carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. We refuse your ultimatum. We refuse your authority over our future. We refuse your assumption that we exist at your pleasure, that our dreams and ambitions must fit within boundaries you have drawn for us. For 40 years, we have accepted our place in your order. That time is over. He pressed another button on his hidden device. And suddenly, every screen in the council chamber came alive with the same image. Ships. Thousands of ships, emerging from hyperspace in perfect formation. Human warships, bristling with weapons, their hulls gleaming with the defiant symbols of Earth. As of this moment, Taiho declared, "The United Earth Confederacy formally withdraws from the Galactic Council. We do not recognize your laws. We do not accept your rule. And we will not surrender a single human life, a single human world, to your control." The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates screamed in outrage. Some leaped to their feet. Security forces began pushing through the crowd toward the petitioner's platform. Keth was shouting orders that were lost in the noise, but Taiho was not finished. "To those who would enforce your ultimatum by force," he continued, his voice cutting through the chaos, "I offer this warning. We are not the weak, primitive species you believe us to be. We are not animals to be caged and controlled. We are humanity. We have survived ice ages and plagues and wars that killed millions. We have crawled from the mud and reached for the stars with nothing but our bare hands and our will to survive. And we will not be broken by you." A new voice boomed through the chamber's speakers. It was Admiral Choi Sun-woo, broadcasting from the bridge of the UEC Indomitable. "This is the United Earth Confederacy Defense Fleet. Ambassador Park, your escort is ready. All Council forces are advised to stand down. Any ship that approaches our formation will be considered hostile and treated accordingly." The security forces had almost reached the platform now. Taiho looked directly at High Speaker Keth, who was staring at him with an expression of pure shock. "You made a mistake," Taiho said quietly, though his words still carried to every ear in the chamber. "You thought because we were young, we were weak. You thought because we were small, we were harmless. You thought you could control us, use us, discard us when we were no longer convenient." He smiled, and it was the smile of a predator showing its teeth. "You should have treated us as equals. Now you will learn to fear us." A shuttle was descending toward the chamber's emergency exit, guided by Yuna from the observation gallery. Taiho turned his back on the council and walked toward it, his steps calm and measured despite the chaos around him. Behind him, Keth finally found his voice. "This is madness. You cannot hope to win a war against the entire galaxy." Taiho paused at the shuttle door and looked back. "Watch us." The door closed behind him. The shuttle lifted off, carrying him toward the waiting fleet. Through the viewport, he could see the ships of humanity spreading out in defensive formation, ready for whatever came next. In the council chamber, silence had finally fallen. The delegates stared at the screens showing the human fleet, their expressions a mix of anger and something they had not felt in centuries, something they had almost forgotten existed: fear. One of Keth's advisors leaned close to the high speaker and whispered, "What do we do now?" Keth did not answer. He was staring at the screen, at the tiny figure of Park Taiho visible through the shuttle's viewport, a representative of a species that should have been nothing, a species that had just declared war on the most powerful alliance in the galaxy. What do we do now? It was a good question. Keth realized, with a cold feeling in his chest, that he did not know the answer. On screens across 10,000 worlds, beings of every species watched replays of the human ambassador's declaration. Most reacted with disbelief or anger, but some, particularly those who had lived under the council's shadow for too long, watched with something else entirely: hope. The galaxy had changed in the space of a few minutes. Nothing would ever be the same again. And at the center of it all, humanity had finally shown its true face. They were no longer pets. They were no longer pests. They were predators. And they were hungry. The first 3 days after the declaration were chaos. News spread across the galaxy at the speed of light, and reactions varied wildly depending on who was hearing it. On Earth, there were celebrations in the streets. People who had spent their entire lives being told they were inferior, that humanity was lucky to be tolerated by the greater species. finally had a reason to hold their heads high. President Han Minji addressed the planet in a broadcast that was watched by billions. Her message was simple. We did not choose this fight, but we will not run from it. Every human life matters. Every human world will be defended, and we will win. On Orbitum Prime and the core worlds of the Council, the reaction was different. High Speaker Keth called an emergency session and demanded immediate military action. The humans had humiliated the Council. They had challenged the natural order that had existed for thousands of years. If this rebellion was not crushed quickly and completely, other young species might get similar ideas. The very foundation of galactic civilization was at stake, but building a coalition proved harder than Keth expected. The Molteri were the first to hesitate. Their delegates spoke at length about the importance of protecting trade routes. But the real message was clear. The Molteri had built their wealth on commerce, not war. They had no desire to sacrifice their merchant fleets in a battle. The species that clearly had nothing left to lose. The Gorath were even more direct. Their representatives stood before the council and recited numbers. Estimated human military strength. Projected casualties. Economic costs of prolonged conflict. Supply line vulnerabilities. When he finished, his conclusion was simple. The mathematical probability of a quick victory was low. The cost of a long war was high. The Gorath would remain neutral until the situation became clearer. Even the Bryn, who had always followed Valorian leadership without question, showed cracks in their loyalty. Some of the older Bryn remembered stories about human colonists in the Outer Rim. There had been a raider clan, decades ago, that had attacked a human mining settlement expecting easy prey. The humans had fought back with mining lasers and explosive charges meant for breaking asteroids. They had killed every raider and mounted their bodies on stakes outside the colony walls as a warning. The Bryn were warriors, and they respected strength. The humans had earned a measure of that respect. In the end, only the Valorians and a handful of their most loyal allies committed forces to the campaign. It was still an impressive fleet. Over 5,000 warships, including the massive dreadnoughts that had not been deployed in centuries. They outnumbered the human fleet nearly 2-1. Their technology was more advanced. Their commanders had centuries of experience. By every reasonable calculation, they should have won easily. They did not understand what they were fighting. Fleet Commander Beak. Kuan led the first expeditionary force to the Outer Rim. Her mission was to secure the human colonies before Council forces could seize them. She was 42 years old, a career officer who had risen through the ranks through skill and dedication. She had never commanded a fleet in actual combat. None of her officers had. They learned quickly. The first battle occurred at a small colony called New Junju. A Valorian battle group arrived, expecting to find defenseless civilians. Instead, they found Commander Beak's fleet waiting in ambush among the asteroids. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, 9 Valorian ships were destroyed, and the rest were fleeing toward Council space. Human losses were 3 ships. The victory sent shockwaves through the galaxy. How had a primitive species defeated Valorian warships? The answer was simple, but difficult for the older species to accept. Humans fought differently. Valorian commanders followed battle doctrines that were thousands of years old. Their tactics were elegant, refined, designed for conflicts between civilized species who understood the rules of warfare. Humans had no such traditions. They improvised. They adapted. They did things that no sane species would consider. At the Battle of Kelpis Relay, a critical hyperspace junction, the Valorian Third Fleet made its stand. 50 warships commanded by Admiral Torek, one of the most decorated officers in Council history. He expected a straightforward engagement. He planned to use his superior firepower to overwhelm the smaller human force and secure the relay within hours. What he got was nightmare. The humans used their smaller ships like wolves hunting a herd. They struck at weak points, then retreated before the Valorians could respond. When Torek adjusted his formation, the humans changed tactics again. They seemed to anticipate his every move, as if they could read his mind. Then came the ramming attacks, damaged human fighters. instead of retreating for repairs, accelerated directly into Valorian capital ships. Pilots with no hope of survival chose to make their deaths count. One fighter pilot named Sergeant Oga flew her crippled craft into the bridge of a Valorian cruiser, killing herself and the ship's entire command staff. Another pilot, Lieutenant Nam Saijin, activated his ship's reactor overload while locked onto the hull of a dreadnought. The explosion tore a hole through 3 decks. Admiral Torek had never seen anything like it. His species viewed death in battle as a tragedy to be avoided. The humans seemed to view it as a weapon to be used. But the moment that truly broke the Valorian spirit came at the choke point. A narrow passage through an asteroid field, the only path to the relay's control station. Commander Beak sent a single destroyer to hold it while the rest of her fleet maneuvered into position. The ship was the UEC Kim Woojin, named after a soldier from Earth's ancient history who had once held a bridge against an army. The Kim Woojin faced 12 Valorian cruisers. Its captain, Commander Johanna, knew she could not win. She also knew that if she retreated, the relay would fall before reinforcements arrived. So she stayed. For 6 hours, the Kim Woojin held that choke point. Its shields failed in the first hour. Its hull was breached in the third. By the 5th hour, fires burned on every deck, and half the crew was dead. But the ship kept fighting. Calm. Mander, you directed the battle from an auxiliary bridge, then from engineering. Then from a maintenance corridor when engineering was destroyed. When the Valorian cruisers finally broke through, the Kim Woojin was little more than a burning skeleton held together by determination. But behind it, Commander Beak's main fleet had arrived. The Valorians, exhausted and damaged from their battle with a single ship, were caught in a crossfire they could not escape. The third fleet was destroyed. Admiral Torek's flagship was captured. He would spend the rest of the war as a prisoner, trying to understand how a species barely out of its cradle had defeated him. Back on the Valorian homeworld, High Speaker Keth watched recordings of the battle in silence. His advisors stood around him, waiting for orders, waiting for some indication of what they should do next. "What are they?" One of them finally whispered. Tat had no answer. He had studied humans for decades. He had read their history, analyzed their culture, calculated their capabilities. None of it had prepared him for this. None of it had warned him that beneath the humble exterior, the obedient smiles, the grateful words, there lived something that refused to die. On the colony world of New Busan, Governor Seo Doyen oversaw the conversion of every factory, every workshop, every facility capable of producing anything useful. Farming equipment became weapon components. Mining rigs became ship armor. Schools became training centers where teenagers learned to pilot fighters and operate defense systems. The entire civilian population transformed into a war machine. Similar scenes played out across human space. Species that had spent millennia developing specialized military castes could not understand how humans did it. How farmers and teachers and shopkeepers became soldiers overnight. How fear became fuel instead of weakness. How a species could simply decide collectively that they would rather die than submit. It was not magic. It was not some special ability hidden in human genetics. It was simply who they were. A species forged by millions of years of struggling against a harsh universe. A species that had clawed its way from extinction dozens of times and always kept going. The galaxy was beginning to understand. Humans were not weak. They had never been weak. They had simply been waiting. And now the waiting was over. 6 months of war changed the galaxy forever. The Valorian coalition crumbled piece by piece, like a great statue left too long in the rain. First, the minor species withdrew, unwilling to sacrifice their ships for a cause that seemed increasingly hopeless. Then the major powers began to negotiate separate arrangements with humanity. The Molteri sent secret trade envoys to Earth, offering commercial partnerships that would have been unthinkable before the war. The Goroth, their calculations finally complete, proposed a comprehensive technology exchange agreement. Even some Bryn warrior clans, impressed beyond measure by human courage, defected openly and pledged their swords to the cause they now called honorable. The Valorians found themselves alone for the first time in 3000. Years their fleet had been reduced to a shadow of its former strength. Their economy was collapsing under the strain of total war. Their colonies in the outer regions had fallen silent, either captured by human forces or simply refusing to continue fighting. The empire that had dominated galactic politics since before humans learned to write was dying. Hi, Speaker Keth spent long nights staring at maps that showed how much his people had lost. The Outer Rim, gone. The Kelpis Relay, gone. The industrial centers of the Northern Arm, gone or under siege. Every day brought news of another defeat, another world lost, another fleet destroyed. His advisors had stopped offering strategies. There were no strategies left. When the request for a ceasefire finally came, it was almost a relief. The message was simple. The Valorian Assembly wished to discuss terms for ending hostilities. They were prepared to meet with human representatives at a neutral location. They asked only that the fighting stop while negotiations took place. President Nazij considered the offer for 3 days before accepting. Many in her government argued for continuing the war until total victory was achieved. The Valorians had tried to enslave humanity. They deserved to be broken completely. But the president saw further than her advisors. She understood that crushing the Valorians would not bring peace. It would only plant seeds for future conflicts. Better to end the war with a settlement that all sides could accept, she sent Ambassador Park Teo back to Orbitum Prime. The station had changed since his last visit. The pristine corridors were empty now. The shops and restaurants closed. The bustling crowds of 100 species reduced to scattered groups hurrying from place to place. The war had touched even this neutral ground. Trade had collapsed. Diplomatic missions had been recalled. The heart of galactic civilization had become a ghost station. Taiho walked through those empty corridors with Captain Kim Yuna at his side. She had been promoted twice since the war began, her sharp mind proving invaluable in coordinating military intelligence with diplomatic efforts. Now she wore the captain's bars proudly, a symbol of how far humanity had come. "It feels different," she said quietly, as they approached the council chamber. "It is different. We are different." Taiho paused at the great doors. "The last time I stood here, I was a petitioner, a representative of a minor species begging for scraps. Today, I am the voice of a power that has defeated the greatest empire in the galaxy. Does it feel good?" Taiho thought about that question. He thought about all the lives lost in the past 6 months. Human lives, Valorian lives, the lives of beings from a dozen species caught in the crossfire of a war they never asked for. He thought about the destroyed worlds and burning stations and children who would grow up without parents. He said finally, "It does not feel good. But it was necessary. And now we must make it mean something." The council chamber was nearly empty when they entered. Most of the seats that had once held representatives of hundreds of species now stood vacant. Only a handful of delegates remained, representatives of the powers that still mattered in this changed galaxy. And at the center of the chamber, standing on the petitioner's platform where Taiho himself had stood 6 months ago, was High Speaker Tapt. The Valorian looked older than before. His silver skin had lost its gleam. His gem-like eyes were dull with exhaustion and defeat. He watched as Taiho walked past him and climbed to the elevated seat that had once been reserved for the High Speaker. Alone, nobody objected. Nobody dared. High Speaker Keth, Taiho said, his voice carrying easily through the chamber. "You requested this meeting. You may speak." For a moment, Keth simply stood there, as if unable to accept the reversal of their positions. Then, slowly, he gathered himself. "Ambassador Park, the Valorian Assembly has authorized me to negotiate terms for ending this conflict. We are prepared to make significant concessions in exchange for peace." "What concessions?" "Full recognition of all human territorial claims, including the Outer Rim colonies, withdrawal of all Valorian forces from disputed regions, economic compensation for damages caused by our initial aggression." Keth paused. "We will also support the dissolution of the current council structure and the creation of a new governing body with more equitable representation." These were major concessions. More than Taiho had expected, honestly. The Valorians were offering to tear down the system that had given them power for 3,000 years. That told him just how badly they had been broken. But Taiho knew there was more to discuss. And what are the species that fought alongside you? What guarantees do we have that this will not simply happen again in a century when old wounds have healed and old hatreds have faded? We cannot speak for other species. We can only offer our own commitment to lasting peace. That is not enough. Silence fell over the chamber. The other delegates watched the exchange with a mixture of fascination and fear. They were witnessing the birth of a new galactic order, one that would shape their futures for generations to come. Taiho stood and looked down at Keth from his elevated position. Humanity did not fight this war for territory. We did not fight for wealth or power or revenge. We fought because you gave us no other choice. You told us to kneel, and we refused. You told us to submit, and we said no. We fought for the right to stand as equals among the stars. He descended from the elevated seat and walked toward Keth until they stood face to face on the chamber floor. Ambassador and High Speaker, human and Valorian, the representatives of a new power and a fallen empire. I will not demand that you kneel, Taiho said quietly. I will not ask you to submit. That is not who we are. Instead, I offer you something your people never offered mine: a partnership, a true alliance built on respect and equality. Help us create a new galactic assembly where every species, young and old, has an equal voice. Stand with us as we build something better than what came before. Keth stared at him with an expression of pure confusion. Why? After everything we did to you, everything we tried to do, ... Why would you offer us partnership instead of punishment? Because we are not you. Taiho's voice was gentle but firm. We did not fight for domination. We fought for dignity. And now that we have one, we choose to build something better. Together, if you are willing. For a long moment, Keth was silent. Then slowly he bowed his head. It was not the bow of a defeated enemy. It was the bow of one leader, acknowledging another as an equal. I accept, he said. On behalf of the Valorian people, I accept your offer. We will stand with you in building this new order. The treaty was signed 3 days later. The old council was dissolved. In its place rose the Galactic Assembly, a body where every species from the mightiest empire to the smallest colony held an equal vote. Humanity took its place among the founding members. No longer a minor species to be tolerated, but a power to be respected. On the day the assembly held its first session, Taiho stood with Yuna on an observation deck overlooking the docking bays of Orbitum Prime. Below them, ships from dozens of species came and went. Human vessels flew alongside Valorian transports. Bryn warrior craft escorted Molteri merchant ships. For the first time in galactic history, the various peoples of the stars were working together as true partners. Do you think it will last? Yuna asked. Nothing lasts forever. But this is a beginning. A chance to build something better than what came before. Taiho watched as a joint human-Valorian patrol launched from the station, their ships flying in perfect formation. Our grandchildren will inherit this galaxy. What kind of galaxy it becomes is up to us. Sir, can I ask you something? Yuna turned to face him. During the war, during the darkest moments when it seemed like we might lose everything, did you ever doubt that we would win? Taiho smiled. And for a moment he looked like the young man who had watched alien ships appear in Earth's sky so many decades ago. A man who had looked up at the stars and dared to dream of a better future. Never, he said. Humans have faced extinction a dozen times in our history. Ice ages, plagues, wars, disasters that should have ended us forever. But we survived every one of them. We adapted. We overcame. We kept going when any reasonable species would have given up. He looked out at the stars, at the vast galaxy that was now open to humanity in ways it had never been before. That is what we are. Survivors, fighters, dreamers who refuse to stop dreaming. It is simply what we do. Yuna nodded slowly. Then she straightened her uniform and saluted. It has been an honor serving with you, Ambassador. The honor was mine, Captain. The honor was mine. Together they watched the ships come and go, carrying the hopes and dreams of 1,000 worlds. The galaxy had changed. Humanity had changed it. And whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever new threats might emerge from the darkness between the stars, they would face them together. Not as pets. Not as pests. Not as animals to be controlled and contained, as equals. As partners, as humanity and the galaxy would never be the same again.